you're not a candidate, you will be muted and you won't be taken off mute for any portion of tonight's roundtable. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer, including an introduction and also 3 questions. Although the formal discussion ends after the last question, you're encouraged and of course welcome to stay for audience questions. We will start at 6 p.m. promptly. We might have a couple of seconds in between then. We also have a timer who's my co-founder and who won't hesitate to let you know when your time is up.
Hi, everyone. Just wanted to introduce myself as well. Winkuni Siant. I will be taking my video off so I can make sure that I'm staying timely, but if you hear my voice just hitting you at the 2-minute mark, that will be your cue. But I did want to introduce myself. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and I'm going to go back on video list and mute until your 2 minutes are done. So excited to hear everyone's platforms.
Absolutely. So once again, everyone, I'm Jordan Wilson. For anyone that I've not met in person or before the evening, I'm the co-founder of Politicking app. I'm a Gary native and obviously from the 1st District. I'll be your constituent for anyone who's elected on June 2nd. I'm happy to have you here today because Politicking is an application that helps young people, and particularly young brown and Black folks, help understand who they're voting for and exactly which issues are on the ballot. This evening is particularly special because we're right around the corner from the 1st District primary. It's been a very interesting race. I'm happy to hear more about the landscape from you all, but of course we want to know about the issues, and we want to know in particular what you'll do to represent your constituents. Each candidate, again, will have 2 minutes for introduction and questions, and of course, I would like to repeat that although we wouldn't like to interrupt you, we will have to let you know when your time is up. So we'll start by asking each candidate to pick a number between 1 to 14. Starting with Attorney Harper, or Jim, I'm sorry.
1.
Sabrina.
8.
Attorney Hall.
7.
Mayor McDermott. 8. Mayor McDermott, would you mind picking a number between 1 and 14?
I was wondering why nobody responded. 9.
What'd you say?
9.
9, okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Trustee, or Frank.
12, please.
Awesome. Colonel Daggett.
14.
Awesome. Mr. Bergeron.
3.
Awesome. Melissa.
10.
Scott.
8.
Awesome. So the order for the evening will go as follows. Dion will go first, Jim will go second, Colonel Daggett third, Mayor McDermott fourth, Melissa fifth, Trustee Mrvan sixth, Scott 7, Sabrina 8. Does that all work for you all?
Sure.
Awesome. I'd like for
Could
you
you go
to
through
start.
that one more time? I'm
You
sorry.
didn't call my name.
Of
Ms.
course.
Wilson.
I thought I called you last, and I'll repeat it. Dion is first, Jim is second, Colonel Daggett third, Mayor McDermott fourth, Melissa is fifth, Trustee Frank is sixth, Scott is 7, Attorney Hall, you're last.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I'd like for you all to introduce yourself to our audience. Many of them are from the 1st District, but many are not. Please let them know who you are and what exactly your candidacy is all about. Dion,
Right.
you'll be going first.
Okay. Hi, my name is Dion Bergeron. I am not a politician. I was a former truck driver, former correctional officer, got into real estate. My campaign is about bringing the voice in Washington. Instead of it being my voice, I want it to be your voice. For too long, we've been represented by people who pretended to listen to us. I'm married to my wife, Elizabeth, waiver case manager, and we have issues in the home healthcare industry. I want to bring attention to that. I want to bring more light to that. I want to solve those issues. I don't have fancy prepared speeches. I don't have a political team that releases press releases that have been polished. I say what's on my mind. I talk directly to you, the voter, every night at 7 p.m., and I will continue to do that. I want to bring this district together. For too long, we've been divided over politics. We've been divided over all different kinds of things. There have been focus on what's wrong, focus on what's wrong. Not enough of us can really honestly focus on what's right. And that's something that I want to do. Am I still good?
Until our timekeeper set. Yeah.
Yeah, 45 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Look, this region has been controlled by Democrats for 90 plus years. You ask yourself is, what do you have to lose? Elect me 2 years. If it sucks, get rid of me. If it was the shining beacon that it should be after 90 plus years, a lot of things would be different. A lot of things would be much, much better. Realistically, what do we have to lose by having a real change? Thank you.
Thank you, Dion. Jim. We're going to unmute you.
And I am muted, apparently. Hey, my name is Jim Harper, Democratic candidate for U.S. Congress in Northwest Indiana. Jordan and everybody at Politicking, thank you for hosting this. Start by saying, obviously, you know, this forum is occurring on a very special day, Memorial Day, and I know that everybody on this forum has taken some time today to think about and remember those who served our country, and in particular those who have served, paid the ultimate price, and I'll begin by doing that. I'm an attorney. I became an attorney because I am committed to fighting for everybody in my community. That's why after I graduated from Georgetown Law School and worked as a law clerk for a federal judge, I moved to New Orleans and worked in one of the most underserved, understaffed public defenders' offices in the country. Criminal justice reform continues to be an issue that is very important for me and that I would like to lead on in Congress. It's also why I helped to found a national nonprofit law firm that has represented hundreds of veterans around this country and allowed them to gain millions of dollars in benefits that they're entitled to for injuries that they obtained or suffered during their service. I continue to work with that nonprofit. Is that when I've moved back to Northwest Indiana, I also work with a nonprofit in Valparaiso that provides early childhood education, and I continue to do work as a public defender. I'm running for Congress because I think we have really big problems in this country, certainly pre-COVID, but the coronavirus crisis has only highlighted not only those problems, but in particular the inequalities that we continue to experience. And I believe we need big progressive solutions to address those problems, whether it's a healthcare system that leaves 30 million people in this country uninsured, and we've seen how an employer-based healthcare system simply doesn't work during an economic crisis like this, a president who is just out of control and undermining the rule of law in this country, or a climate that is in crisis. I want to advocate for big solutions, from Medicare for all to holding this president or anybody else who's going to be lawless like him accountable, to bold action on climate change, including a green
Thank you.
These are some of the solutions I look forward to advocating for in Congress.
Thanks, Jim. Colonel Daggett.
We honor those who are serving right now, men and women who are serving in harm's way to defend this nation. In fact, last week we lost 2 of our soldiers, and we want to make sure that we recognize the sacrifice that those families of those soldiers are making. So we honor them today. I am Colonel Tony Daggett. This is my lovely wife, Vita, of 37 years. We are the proud parents of we have 10 natural children. Vita had all 10 of them, that's correct. We have 8 boys and we have 2 girls. I am, as I said, a retired United States Army colonel. Raised our children here in Northwest Indiana over 20 years. My last duty station was at the Pentagon, where I currently have a top secret security clearance, which allows me to be fully integrated into whatever is going on in Washington, D.C. in a moment's notice, and allows me to be able to bring resources needed for the Indiana 1st Congressional District. I am actually one of 10 siblings. My parents also had 10 of us. My dad, a retired police officer, 30 years of service as a police officer, raised 10 of us on a union salary. So I believe very strongly in unions and in support of unions. My personal background, I'm a school district superintendent, passed a national school superintendent exam. I am a licensed high school principal in the state of Indiana and Illinois. I'm also, of our 10, we have a Yale grad in biology. We have a Tuskegee graduate, mechanical engineering. We have a daughter who's a Valpo grad, double major, biology and chemistry. And then we have a son who just graduated a week ago, Valpo in computer science. Of our 10 children, 9 are millenniums. We are committed, obviously, to millennials. And we believe that we are able to guide the direction and guide the discussion and that millennials are interested in. So we want to definitely be part of the discussion. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jordan. Thank you to Politicking and to Jordan for lining this up. I want to start off on Memorial Day, recognizing the hundreds of thousands of veterans that have put it all on the line for the United States of America to give us the freedoms we have right now to celebrate by voting for our next congressman. So thank you very much to the veterans that gave the ultimate sacrifice. And today on Memorial Day, I'd also like to remember the 100,000 Americans that have passed from the COVID-19 epidemic. Something to think about this weekend for sure. I wasn't born in the 1st Congressional District. I grew up in a divorced household. My father was a Hammond native. My mom was in California, and I spent my entire life going back and forth between California and Indiana, literally every summer of my life up until I was 18, when right out of high school, I enlisted in the United States Navy for 6 years. 4 years and 3 months of my 6-year enlistment, I was on the fast attack nuclear powered submarine, Hyman G. Rickover. I was an electrician in the nuclear power plant. I was also the ship's diver. I only wanted one thing when I got out of the Navy, and that was to go to college. I wish I had that same attitude in high school, but I didn't. When I got out of the Navy, I was a focused young man. I was 24 years old, and I enlisted full-time while carrying a job at NIPSCO. I worked for Purdue Northwest, I went to school at Purdue Calumet at the time, graduated with a finance degree. From there, got accepted to the University of Notre Dame for law school, where I met my beautiful wife, Marissa. Her and I both graduated in the year 2000 and moved to Hammond, Indiana, which is where we still live to this day. 3 years after moving to Hammond, I was elected the city's mayor. I've been a mayor since 2004, 5 terms. I was also, in 2009, elected Lake County Democratic Party chairman. I was Democratic chairman for 5 years when I resigned after being reelected the year before. My highlights of being mayor: I sent 6,000 kids to college using the Hammond College program. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Melissa?
Thank you, Jordan, for hosting this forum. I am a daughter of a Vietnam veteran, so this day is definitely very important to me as we reflect and remember those men and women who served our country and died for the freedom that we are exercising right here today. My name is Melissa Borom, and I am running for the 1st Congressional District. I am born and raised in this community. I graduated from Valpo Law School. While at Valpo, I had the opportunity to work for Congressman Pete Visklowski, Senator Dick Durbin, and also the House Committee on Appropriations. And since graduating, I have managed government affairs for a global aviation company where I've been extremely fortunate enough to actually work with Congress in a different capacity other than working for Congress in getting legislation or bill passed to set aside $50 million in the form of scholarships for the aviation industry for pilots and technicians. I've also been able to work on the last 2 stimulus packages, and up until a few days ago, I was working on the 4th stimulus package. As one of the millennials who's running for Congress, it is important for me to focus on education, focus on career opportunities, and focus on healthcare, and also focus on creating an intentional pipeline where we are really intentional about making sure that our future generation have a place to work in the 1st Congressional District. It is important for me as a person who I don't come from, the political elite. I am making a way on my own, and so many people in the 1st Congressional District can relate to that story. And so making sure that they have a place to work and to provide for their children. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Frank, please.
I'm Frank Mrvan. I'm Frank Mrvan. I am a candidate for U.S. Congress. I also want to say that we honor all of our veterans today on Memorial Day. Colonel Daggett, the mayor, I think Mr. Hall, and any other veteran that may be on this panel. I respect your service and I respect what you've done. And for all those who have sacrificed, I also respect you. So I'm Frank Mrvan. I was born and raised in Hammond, Indiana. I went to Morton High School, and from there I went to Ball State. At Morton High School, I met my wife, Jane, who was my high school sweetheart. We met when we were 16, and I was 17 and she was 16. We have 2 daughters, Genevieve, who is 17 years old now, and Scarlett, who's 13. I have a dog, Truman. And ultimately, what you need to know about me is I'm an authentic individual that works extremely hard in proving myself to people, to bringing them together. And so as a North Township trustee, I represent Hammond, Whiting, East Chicago, Highland, and Munster. And in those urban areas for the last 15 years, I've helped people who are living on the margins. We help them have access to healthcare. We help them create opportunities so they can have access to trades, to schools, and to make sure that we are focusing on people's better health and education and opportunity. And what I've learned by doing that is no one wants anything for free. They want to be able to create an opportunity, be able to prove themselves and go out into the world. And that's what I stand for. And today I hope you are able to judge authenticity and be able to relate to a candidate that you can have trust in, will work for you, and be able to help everyone create and get their full potential. I thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Scott?
Can you hear me okay? I apologize. My name is Scott Costello. I grew up in Illinois. My father was a World War II veteran and a union teacher. My mother was a secretary. I moved to Indiana in 2012. I've been a social worker for 30 years for my entire career. I've done all kinds of things as a social worker. I've worked in nursing homes, hospitals, community organizations. I am running for office for systemic change. I consider myself to be part of a movement along with candidates like Ilhan Omar and Bernie Sanders. I actually appreciate you hosting this, Jordan, tonight, because one of the things that I'm strongly believe in is campaign finance reform, where we have public elections, where we use our electronic resources to have free access to data for voters. So this is really important for me to participate in this. It's a really important application, so I hope it's very successful. But I'm running for, I feel like the poor, the working class, the middle class, and unions are grossly underrepresented in Congress. As a matter of fact, I know that as a fact because hardly 2% of candidates in Congress are from the working class, and almost no one has been from the poor or lower classes. We also need to fight racism on all fronts. We need to fight for economic justice and social justice. For example, economic bill of rights, for affordable housing, a jobs guarantee. We need environmental justice, So not just these policies, but systemic change as well with our banking system, our economic system, so that everybody has equal access to capital and credit. We also need to end the war on drugs. We need to legalize marijuana and make all drugs decriminalized and focus on drug treatment. I'm, of course, for the Green New Deal, Medicare for all, and these are just some of the important things on my platform, why I'm running.
Thank you, Scott. Attorney Hall, please.
Yes, good afternoon, Ms. Wilson. First of all, let me apologize for not recognizing you the other night. And to you and your staff and your mom, Mayor Kerr and Freeman Wilson. And I'd like to just say that happy Memorial Day to everyone. And I recognize that like the veterans who gave so much for our freedom in the United States of America and around the world. I was born in Mountain Bayou, Mississippi, out on Henry Hall and John Hall farms. I left after graduating from high school and went into the United States Air Force and served for 4.5 years, and then returned to Mississippi and got married to my beautiful wife, Katie Green Hall. And we, after a few months in Mississippi after marriage, we headed down 61 Highway, to 66 Highway, and then on to Gary, Indiana. And I got a job in the mill and worked in the mill as a laborer, and then got promoted to a scale clerk, and from there to a foreman, and from there to a shift superintendent. Then I went back to college. And we both went back to college, as a matter of fact, and we earned our BS degree, my wife and I, Congresswoman Katie Hall. And we went on to get a master's degree, and later on I got into law school and on. I was involved first, and then of course my wife came in, and she was selected to run for office because I was working on a second master's at that time. And the Lord blessed her to be able to author and sponsor,
Thank you.
I should say, the Dr. Martin Luther King Holiday Law. And
Thank you, Attorney Hall.
Okay.
I'm going to move on to our first question, which goes
Okay.
to all candidates. Can everyone hear?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
You didn't ask me a question.
You missed Sabrina.
Yeah.
Sabrina, my apologies, please.
Quite all right. Can you hear me?
Thank you for that. Absolutely. We can
No
hear
problem.
you.
No problem. It got reordered when you gave Attorney Hall his number, so it's no problem. I also want to give a shout out to Politicking and Jordan for a wonderful app and for putting this together. And also a shout out to our soldiers and our men and women in uniform and the people who've sacrificed. You know that saying, if you can read this, thank a teacher. Well, if you're grateful for your First Amendment and your civil liberties, thank a soldier, because freedom isn't free, as the cliche goes, but it's very, very true. And I feel that to my heart. I have a background in manufacturing and law. I have lived in Gary, in the Miller Beach section of Gary, for about 25 years. I've been an attorney in Chicago, but an investor in Gary, repeated investor in Gary. And I see a lot of opportunity in Gary. And I know we're going to talk about crime. I think when we talk about crime rates, it's really a function of a lack of perceived opportunity and real opportunity. The lower income sections of this district have not kept up with the rest of the district. And I want to specifically close the racial income gap. We are sitting on steel, fresh water, a port, air, and rail. We should be the economic powerhouse of the country. And I'm very interested in redoing our infrastructure to gear up toward renewable energy, because all of Indiana's biggest employers have told the Republican mayor that they will not build factories here until they have greater access to renewable energy. And the reason for that is they have to compete globally. If we're going to get back into manufacturing widgets, we have to be able to compete on the global market. And our factories would become obsolete in 10 years if they're competing with factories abroad where they're making things with wind and solar, because it's so much cheaper. They've all put their opinions on record to this Republican administration. My economic development plan is based on expanding renewable energy, going into the recyclable wind turbine industry, which is going to exceed $1 trillion, converting abandoned warehouses into hydroponic farms, greening our location in our brownfields, and
Thank you.
marijuana. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Our first question goes to each candidate. It's a simple question. A significant portion of Northwest Indiana's political presence is from African American political participation. How will you use your role as a member of Congress to reshape the strained relationship between the Black and Brown residents of the district and our police force? And we'll continue the order that we started with introductions. That starts with you, Dion.
All right. Thank you. First of all, I have law enforcement experience. I worked at Indiana State Prison for 7 years. During that time, one thing that I learned once you're kind of in the system, right? First of all, I'm one of the few, I would say, law enforcement officers that understand that the system is rigged. The system is broken. The law enforcement system, the criminal justice system is geared to keep the poor down. I've seen it. I've experienced it. There is no equality. Our public defender's offices are overwhelmed, underpaid, understaffed. These are all things that would have to be addressed and have to be brought to attention. There are numerous things that can be done, but it starts with listening. It starts with listening to the constituents, listening to people who know more than me about the issues that are out there. I can give you idea after idea and tell you I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. But what I will promise you is that I will listen to my constituents. I talk every night. I listen to what they have to say. And it really just comes down to forming a real relationship with the members of the community, listening to what they have to say. I can't tell you what you experience, but you can tell me, and I can learn from you. I'm willing to learn from all of the people here tonight, all of the people that are running, all of the ones that are in the district and want to contribute to the solution rather than contribute to the cause. We've seen it over and over: divisiveness, hatefulness, rhetoric. I personally just want us to get moving with running the country, with bringing in people, with listening to people that know far more than I about what's really wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Dion. We're moving on to Jim.
That's a great question, Jordan, and I'm really glad you raised that issue. I think most importantly, the first thing that we need to do is recognize the problem, recognize there's an issue, recognize the very legitimate concerns that many people in this district, particularly many Black and Brown people in this district, have, and address those head on. And there's a few things that I would do, or that I would encourage to address those head on. First and foremost, we need to work with our police forces to make sure that there is diverse hiring going on, so that we have diverse police forces that look like the communities that they patrol. Obviously, that's primarily going to be an issue for those local and state police forces, but the federal government can and should be encouraging that. We also need to be encouraging things like implicit bias training and other things to address bias that does remain sometimes in policing, certainly. The other thing I'd say is it's important, certainly, that we support law enforcement, but also important that we support accountability when there are law enforcement officers who are not following the rules or have done something that is potentially a violation of civil rights. And that is very much a federal concern. And I would work closely with the Department of Justice to make sure that there is, accountability when there are law enforcement officers who do violate residents' civil rights. Last thing is, I think this really points out the importance of bold, aggressive criminal justice reform. As a public defender, I've seen that importance firsthand. I've seen how broken and too often discriminatory our criminal justice system is. So I'll work to do things like ending cash bail, dramatically reducing mandatory minimums, legalizing marijuana, and finding other alternatives to incarceration so that we can not only reduce the damage that sometimes the criminal justice system has done on people's lives, but also more effectively spend our taxpayer dollars.
Thank you, Jim. Colonel Daggett.
Yes, you know, it's important that we be authentic. I think that's extremely important. My PhD that I'll be completing next year is in educational leadership. I've completed my 2 master's degrees. My wife, again, of 37 years in children, completed her bachelor's degree at Columbia and her master's degree as well. I think it's important when we talk about this issue of law enforcement, we have to talk about family. Of our 10, 8 are boys. And because of the family, it makes a strong difference in the direction that they are going right now. My dad, a retired police officer, would tell you that the way you police a community is through relationship. I can remember my dad telling me all the time that 95% of the people that he runs into, if you approach them properly, you will have no problem. He says, there's only 5% of those people, son, that I actually have to take to jail. So what that says is basically how we treat people makes an entire, a huge difference in relationships as well. So as a person who has worked in the Gary schools, I worked at Westside High School as a senior ROTC instructor, at Lew Wallace as a senior ROTC instructor, I understand that we must be willing to reach and meet young people on their terms and understand that they have desires and dreams as well. And that what we want for our children is what anyone wants for their child. The last point I want to make is that if we're honest about this, 9 out of, well, almost 10 of the congressional representatives from the state of Indiana are people who are not of color. We only have 1 out of 10. So those who are running in this race that say that they're about diversity, when they know out of the 10 representatives we have from this state, only 1 is a person of color, I like to question your authenticity. Because if you're really, thank you so much.
Thank you, Colonel. Mayor McDermott.
Thank you. You know, before I became mayor, I was a public defender for 4 years in Lake County courts and represented hundreds of clients that a lot of them were charged appropriately, but I tell you, I saw a lot of things as a public defender that, you know, we won the cases that we, you know, dug in and fought for. And then as Mayor Hammond for the last 16 years, working very closely with law enforcement, you know, in Hammond, it's a very diverse city. We have 25% African-American population, 30% Hispanic population, 45% Caucasian population. So the first thing you have to do is make sure that, could somebody turn down the mute? I hear my voice coming back at me. But first thing you have to do is make sure when you're hiring, your police force should look like the city that you police. That's the first thing you have to do to have credibility. You can't live in a very diverse city and have a very Caucasian force, so to speak. And that's something we've definitely got better on in the last 16 years, and I think it's vitally important. I worked closely with a gentleman named Dion Bergeron from the Department of Justice a few years back and developed a community policing model that we started in Hammond, Indiana, and it's actually been replicated across the country. I think it's vitally important to have outreach where the officers talk to kids, outreach where the officers meet with the public. That's vitally important. And another thing that I think has been very huge for community relations is putting body cameras on all of the Hammond police officers. We were one of the first departments in the state of Indiana that did that. And as a result, every time an officer interacts with the public, they have that body cam on, and everything that's said to them and everything that's said from them is on tape. And if one of my officers is acting inappropriately, we have it on tape. And we've caught officers that have said things before and we've disciplined them appropriately, including termination. And that's how it's got to be. So I tell you, it's a combination of things that I've learned as mayor, hiring the right people to make sure you have a diverse police force, using community policing effectively, and having body cameras so that, you know, we have proper interactions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to take a minute to remind everyone, as the mayor pointed out, to mute yourselves, especially if you're not a candidate. But if you are a candidate, and if it's not your time to have the floor, please make sure that you're muted also, to the extent that you absolutely can. Please keep your cameras on. Melissa.
This question is really personal to me because I can probably say with certainty that I am the only candidate who had a gun pointed at their head by a police officer, who was a Caucasian police officer when I was in Indianapolis. And they call it driving while black. And I was in a situation where I was driving with a good friend of mine, and a police officer who did not have very good race relations pulled us over because he said that she was driving drunk. She had 0.00% blood alcohol in her system. And the process of him trying to figure that out, he put a gun to my head, and he wanted to take me to jail because I told her to ask him what were her rights. So the first thing that I would do or encourage is to make sure we have mayors that will hire good police chiefs. Police chiefs hire police officers. And so we need to make sure that the police chief ideals represent the ideals of the community. And we need to do better in race relations. We need to make sure that the officers that are patrolling the community reflect the interests of the community and that they know each other. You have to build trust. I'm not going to say what city I was in, but it's a city in the 1st Congressional District, and I happened to be behind the police chief, and everybody that he saw on the street, he spoke to, he honked at, he waved at. And so it is important to make sure that that relationship is there between the police chief, the police officers, and the community, because you have to have trust. So that would be the first thing that I do. Everyone speaks about the down ballot. The down ballot also includes getting mayors elected that represent the interests of the community.
Thank you, Melissa. We're moving on to Frank.
So thank you. So the question is, as a member of Congress, how will you best have police and police relations with the African-American community and the Latino community and be able to improve them? So first and foremost, I want to say that I believe that it's all about making sure that people, your elected official as a member of Congress, respects those communities. And I have been endorsed by the Gary Precinct Organization. I only bring that up because you have to be able to relate to communities and you can't take them for granted. So specifically when it comes to police training, we all want to make sure that there's implicit biased training. We want to make sure that there is a diversification within the police group. But beyond that, as a member of Congress, what you have to do is not take that community for granted. You have to be present. You have to support. You have to understand that there are two sides to every story. So I know by dealing with people who live on the margins, very often people are harassed, or they're in the wrong place or at the wrong time, or they're treated unjustly. And these are things that we have to be able to take care of and make sure that their civil rights are protected. And ultimately, when I talk about examples, I worked with Chief Liggins in the city of East Chicago for 5 years to be able to bring the ROTC to the high school, to the city of East Chicago. And what that does is that builds pride in the community. I didn't do that because I was going to run for Congress one day. I did that because I believed in the minority community and they wanted to be able to have something to have pride in. And it's those types of interactions. I also led an effort in East Chicago, Hammond, Whiting, and East Chicago that worked with the police departments that reached out to the community with autism. The policemen were trained on how to approach a home with autism, which we led that organization as a township trustee in the Indiana and Lake County Autism Society. And then what we did is we also trained those individuals on what to expect if a policeman comes. So it's interaction. It's not just speaking when you're running for office and say, I'm for this community.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. We'll be moving on to Scott.
Hi, thank you. I'm very familiar with this issue. I volunteered with Governor Ryan's Death Penalty Moratorium Committee in 1996, and I served on the committee, the subcommittee on racial bias in death sentencing procedures. I wrote a brief after doing some research for that committee and found that it was impossible to remove racial bias from death sentencing procedures. And that was one of the reasons why the moratorium held and became permanent, because if you can't reduce or eliminate, eliminate racial bias in death sentencing, then you do not have a fair process, and therefore it's unconstitutional. Racial bias, discrimination, prejudice, these are issues that in policing, police are like the essence of the ocean is contained in one drop, old saying, you know. We have racism in our society that is endemic. It's part of white culture to be raised with some degree of racism or discrimination or prejudice. And it's implicit, like somebody mentioned, there's implicit biases that we all have to learn to be aware of and confront and alleviate or ameliorate. And we all have some personal responsibility there, but we also need to look at our education, our public education system. Who writes our textbooks? Who writes our curriculum? I believe that we need some federal minimum standards for teaching children about these topics and issues. We also need to, with community policing, I think the federal government provides some degree of funding for community police departments. It'd be nice to have a scientific approach to say, look, whoever can reduce, indicators of racial bias in police departments and improve community relations can have more funding, so that to incentivize it with police departments to come up with creative and innovative solutions to help alleviate the bias that we see in policing.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Scott. We're moving on to Attorney Hall.
The concept that my wife, Congresswoman Hall, did. She was a Southern girl raised on a Southern lady that was moved to Gary, Indiana from Mount Bayou. And she went all the way to Congress of the United States of America. And she was able to get a Republican president, President Ronald Reagan of the United States of America, to sign a bill granting a holiday for an African American. So she was a consensus builder. And I would adhere to that type of political philosophy, to be a consensus builder between the community, all communities in the first district, to have town hall meetings and to seek out the issues that are very relevant in our communities, and particularly in relation to the police department. My wife subsequently became the clerk of the city court of Gary, of the city of Gary, and worked with a lot of police officers of all races and backgrounds. And she never had a problem. And I assisted her in many cases as a lawyer. And we just had a tremendous relationship. I think that kind of attitude can be reflected throughout the state of Indiana. She was the only African-American female to achieve the office of Congress in the state of Indiana. And that was a unique, historic achievement for an African-American lady. And I would like to become the first African-American male.
Thank you.
Level.
Thank you, Attorney Hall. Sabrina?
I agree with a lot of the comments that have already been made, and I'll just amplify on some of them. On community policing, I don't think we can stress enough the importance of having a police force that mirrors the people that they are policing. In terms of trust between the people and the officers, that is so crucial. And community policing also builds the relationship between the police and the residents, and makes them less suspicious and makes them less scared. And when police officers are less afraid, they're less trigger happy. But there's another side of the reason I support community policing, and that's because young African-American children, when they see the police officers and they get to know them, they'll be more inclined to want to go into law enforcement. I think the importance of role models can't be overstressed, and having more community policing and more African-American people on the beat, getting to know people in the neighborhoods is crucial. I also am a big fan of body cams. I think it would help us not only find wrongdoers, but it would also help us defend cases that may be marginal. There's no reason not to have body cams except for perhaps the money. And I think that would be money well spent. I think in the long run, we would save money with body cams because it would save legal costs when it's cut and dry. And I think that would go a long way to help resolving some of our conflicts. With respect to the criminal code, my job early in life was to divert nonviolent offenders out of the prison system. I have always been a believer in not sending nonviolent offenders to prison. They don't belong there. They just learn to become violent when they're in prison. It doesn't do anyone any good. And I don't believe in sending people to prison for drug offenses, and marijuana in particular should have been legal 20 years ago. I think it's a great economic development tool, and I'd like to develop a lottery system where we give back to the communities that were so wrongly imprisoned on drug offenses. My brother did hard time for a drug offense, and I don't make any secret of that because I want people to know that we all have these things in our backgrounds, and a criminal justice, a sentence on your record can ruin your life. And it certainly ruined his. He was never able
Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. Our next question is to each candidate. It's no secret that many college graduates and even some high school graduates are adding to the per capita earnings of our district. What support or legislation is needed at the federal level to make our local economies more attractive to the newest generation of consumers? Of course, we'll go in our regular order, starting with Dion.
Right. Okay. Thank you. We're good. All right. I will say that growing up, I came up here when I was about 10 years old. Growing up in the area, there used to be this huge focus on college. College. Everybody should go to college because our generation, our parents wanted us to have better than what they had. Unfortunately, our trades are desperate for people. Federally, I'll be honest, I don't know what kind of legislation can help this area from a federal level. I know we need to work with our local leaders. We need to get rid of some of the corruption that has kept good quality careers out of this area. We have many areas, I've spoken about this before, that would be ideal for new high quality careers. Part of the reason is I think the minimum wage is higher around Indiana than it is in Indiana. We have people that come here to some of our high quality universities, Purdue, IU, and then they leave. They move out of the area and we can't retain them. The only way we are going to retain them is by ensuring that we have high quality, long lasting careers in this area. I'd like to see some factories that come back. Let's get our production back here. Northwest Indiana is the crossroads of America for a reason. We have an amazing transportation system. We have the Port of Indiana right there. Multiple interstates converge. Let's make it happen. And I'm willing to do that. We have to work with our local leaders, though, to make sure that there's not a shakedown in progress when these leaders, when these business owners come and try to get something going, that they aren't taxed to death like Illinois, that they aren't the recipient of these backroom gun to the head type, pay me or you're not coming here. Things that have been happening for many, many, many years in this area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dion. We're moving on, of course, to Jim.
Thank you for that question, Jordan. It's a really important one. You know, I grew up in the region. I moved away for several years. I moved back about 6 years ago. One of the things I noticed is that a lot of my friends had not moved back from high school. Jordan, I thank you for moving back to the region. I'm sure you've seen that too. And I'm sure, you know, Melissa and some others on this, you know, forum have experienced that as well. It is critically important that we are not only encouraging people to stay in the region, but also encouraging young people and young families to move here from other parts of the country. And I think of all these things under the rubric of quality of life issues. And I think there's a lot we can do to make Northwest Indiana more attractive to people that might be considering it. You know, first and foremost, I think of transportation as a critically important issue. We are right next to not only the third biggest economy in the country, but a diverse cultural hub in the city of Chicago. So certainly make sure that we finish the South Shore line, but also making sure that we have transit around the region. You know, the South Shore is great and I will support it and I do support it, but if you can't get to it or if you can't access other things in the region, it's not going to do you much good. So making sure that we have a comprehensive bus system in the region is also important. Another thing that I think about is protecting our environment. Certainly the Dunes National Park is a great first start and we need to protect that and protect our resources there, but also making sure that we are, you know, looking at things like clean air and clean water and environmental justice and environmental racism, and we have a lot of work to do there. Making sure we have a strong public education system so that people know that when they come to Northwest Indiana, they're going to get good schools is also really important. And that's an area that Indiana simply has not done a good job of. And federal and state policies have been particularly harmful to the Gary Community School Corporation. We need to work to improve teacher pay and invest in our public schools. And that's something that I'll fight for. And the last thing I'll say is let's do things that also, you know, make sure that we are a fair and equitable place. The reality is it remains legal to discriminate against somebody in Indiana because of who they are and who they love. So I'll fight to pass the Employment Non-Discrimination Act to make sure that we make that illegal in Indiana once and for all.
Thanks, Jim. We're moving on to Colonel Daggett.
Attorney Hall, let me first say how much I appreciate the work that your wife did on behalf of this district. There hasn't been bold leadership like that since then. That means a lot to us, and I want you to be aware of that.
Thank you.
Also, we asked this issue of making sure young people return to the area. I would incentivize that by forgiving loans, student loans, for young people to come and return to this area. I think it's important to make sure that we do that because we want to make sure they understand we appreciate the fact that they've taken the time to educate themselves, that they will now come and get started here in this district. We will repay their loans. I think to make sure families remain here, we must include an enhanced K-12 educational system. As a school district superintendent, I know how to go about making sure that a school district is effective and is meeting the state guidelines and that our young people are attaining the exceptional level of education, whether academic or vocational. So there's work that can be done. Again, I always refer to my own wife and our work with our children. I refer to my wife, Vita. She's my Michelle Obama, if you will. And I'm committed, along with her, to enhancing the education of all of our young people. And that's important. We know how to make sure young people succeed. And we know one of the things we can do as a nation is look at incentivizing young people's return to their community by forgiving their student loans. I think if you do that, they'll be more than willing to return. And if you establish an enhanced K-12 educational system so they can start their families here, you will have no problem with making sure that the lifeblood, which is our young people, that lifeblood continues to flow through our community and makes a difference on behalf of the future, which our young people are and are of the present as well. So we are excited about working on behalf of our district.
Thank you, Colonel. Mayor McDermott.
Thank you, Jordan. Great question. In fact, I'm continuing on with Colonel Daggett's answer. I know that Colonel Daggett's a resident of Hammond, Indiana, and I appreciate that. And he has a very large family, and I imagine they probably participate in a great program we have in our city called the College Bound Scholarship, which incentivizes home ownership in our city and also sends kids to college. And a lot of families participate. My family, just like the Colonels, participate in this wonderful program. And one of the great things about it is it helps do exactly what you're talking about, Jordan. Get people to hopefully come back to Hammond in this case, but obviously it's bigger if you're the congressman. But I've been fighting my whole life trying to get people like yourself to move back to your hometown. So I appreciate seeing you going back to the city of Gary, where you call home. But so College Bound has done that and helped stabilize our population, which is important for any city. In fact, a lot of kids that are graduating from college debt-free now are using that savings to come back and buy homes in our city, which is wonderful. Another thing I know about millennials and younger people is, you know, they want walkable neighborhoods. And that's something we weren't geared towards in Hammond, and we're not geared toward in a lot of cities and towns across Northwest Indiana, walkable neighborhoods. We hired a national planner. He's like a rock star in the planning circles, named Jeff Speck, and he gave us a lot of ideas on how to make downtown Hammond walkable. And basically, we're using Congressman Visclosky's vision for the South Shore Line expansion. The part in particular is the Westlake expansion that goes between Hammond and through Munster to the town of Dyer, an amazing project. The double tracking that goes between Gary and Michigan City, it's a no-brainer. It's actually embarrassing that this South Shore Line has operated for over 100 years with a single track between the city of Gary and the city of Michigan City. And I'm glad to see that's being taken care of as we speak right now. And the great vision about the double tracking project in the city of Gary going out to Michigan City, and the Westlake expansion that's happening in Hammond and going out to Dyer through Munster is we're going to be able to create walkable communities in what we call transit-oriented districts, or TODs. Is that my time?
Yes, sir.
That's your time,
sorry.
Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Melissa?
Like him, as a millennial that actually moved back to my community, but not only moved back to my community, but while I moved back to my community, I made national relationships. And so it's not necessarily legislation that needs to be passed. It's leveraging the current relationships that I already have to bring back industry in our community, such as the relationships that I have with ARSA, which is a National Aviation Association, but it includes all of the aviation industry members, such as cargo, right? And the Gary Airport is something that I would definitely hone in on and expand with cargo, because that is what actually creates jobs in our community. I would push education, and not education of going to law school or med school. It is trades, it's construction. Construction is actually a pandemic-proof industry, right? The only thing that stops a construction worker from actually doing the work is the rain. And that's just a delay. And so we need to really focus on how do we train workers to actually do the work and provide for their families. So I would also, good careers lead to great quality of life. So access to transportation, such as the double track train. I actually commute back and forth an hour and a half to Illinois to go to work. And so I need the double track train, because that's a service that I am missing, and I actually have to put a lot of miles on my car. What people and millennials want to do is live, work, and play in their communities. And right now, we cannot do that. And so we need to take politics out of economic development and make sure that the money is actually going to the people who we need to employ. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Frank?
Yes. So first and foremost, I want to make sure that I improve access to private capital. If young people, such as entrepreneurs, want to get into the tech or entrepreneurial programs, they have to be able to have access, and there can't be bias in that. So the Small Business Association has to be fair and equitable. And as a member of Congress, I will go to Washington, D.C. to make sure that there is equalization between the amount of dollars that are going to Caucasians, that are going to minorities, so we level the playing field so everyone has equal opportunity. Obviously, millennials, a lot of them don't own cars and they want walkable city. I, as a North Township trustee, provide transportation for Hammond, Whiting, East Chicago, Highland, and Munster to the tune of 50,000 rides per year. When one of the major cities decided to not have public transportation as a priority, I stepped in and did that. Also, I've been endorsed by Congressman Visclosky because every step of the way, from the beginning, I endorsed his double tracking. I endorsed the extension of the rail. I was there at the meetings. I didn't fight him because it was politically expedient for my own cause. I believed in what he was doing. I believed in the economic development, the opportunity that it will provide not only for the city of Gary, but all of Northwest Indiana. So if you want to improve access to private capital, you also have to enhance inclusion. You have to make sure that you're sitting down with every individual at the table and saying, what is your future look like? And that begins by looking at manufacturing and also the steel industry, so those college graduates who come back who are moving here have opportunities. I've been endorsed by the United Steelworkers, And the infrastructure bill using American steel, building our infrastructure up, building up our ports, creates opportunities. So it is a multi-faceted problem. And what we have to do is make sure there's access to the trades. I've worked with the ministry alliances in Gary, in Hammond, in East Chicago to make sure all individuals have access to that opportunity. If you want to make a difference and you want to live in a community, you first have to believe in who your Congress member is going to Washington, D.C. And he's going there for the purpose of the people, not for his own power.
Thank you, Frank. Scott?
If we continue to lose a younger population, the economy here will not grow. It will essentially die over time. So we need young people to move into the area, not move away from it. I'm for policies that will help younger generations and even older generations that have college debt. We need tuition forgiveness across the board, all of it. We need public education funded through grade 18 through a master's degree. We also need public education to fund professions like in medicine, nursing, all the way from a CNA all the way up to a physician, lawyers. I believe in reparations, and I think that they should come in the form of credit to minority communities, especially Black communities. And I believe we also need public education, especially in professions where minorities, especially Black Americans, are underrepresented. But we also need to have affordable housing. That's a major issue. It isn't just public education that people move to California for because they have such a good public education system. And it isn't just the job market. There's also help with affordable housing, but we need that on a national level. We need affordable housing for veterans. We need housing for homeless. We need housing for poor and minorities and working class adults. We need this permanent affordable housing though, where people, the equity doesn't make the house unaffordable to the next person, and we need it to be well maintained. And for raising the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour as well, if not higher, and that includes teenagers and getting rid of the tipping system, so we have a fair wage for all workers that will help people stay in the community instead of trying to. Anybody who wants to work can get a job through the federal government, like a Works Progress Administration. So people don't have to leave the community to find a job somewhere else. If they can't, if there's not a private sector job.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Scott. Attorney Hall?
Yes. First of all, I would suggest in Washington as well as locally that we have a young people's commission or committee to take them under their arms and wings to show them the way once they locate in an area or relocate. And we would have apprentice programs, OJT programs, and so forth. But before I say anything else, I'd like to thank Colonel Daggett for the very kind comments he made about my sweetheart wife, Congresswoman Hall. Thank you very much, Colonel Daggett. But the focal point, we have two daughters who went through high school, the public schools, I should say, in Gary, Indiana, and went all the way to become young lawyers themselves. So we found in working with our own daughters as being educated in the community that they needed guidance and motivation and inspiration and direction. So I think it would be very important to have a commission or a committee, young people, to direct them when they come to the area and to try to inspire them to develop their various skills and talents, whether it's in the field of carpentry, masonry, or in education or whatever. And I think that's the first place I would start. Is my time up?
You have 30 seconds.
Oh, 30 seconds. So I would focus on young people from that point of view in a comprehensive way to try to give them direction and motivation and supervision in which direction I think they should go in and where their skills are prominent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Hall. Sabrina?
Thank you. To retain and attract young people, we need to provide opportunity, economic opportunity and academic opportunity. I was very active in Jerome Prince's transition as a senior advisor, and it's very troubling to look at your tax base dwindling, but your services don't go down. So it's very difficult economically to keep up with disappearing tax base. I have specific objectives and plans in my economic development plan, and I think I have the most robust economic development plan of anyone running, and I stand by that. One of the things I want to do, I mentioned earlier, the marijuana crop is huge. They are earning $10 million in 1 month in sales tax in Illinois. That tells you that their sales are about 100 million a month. There's no reason for us not to be getting in on that cash crop. I also believe in urban farming. Places all over the city, all over the country are trying to engage in urban farming. Well, we have thousands of vacant acres. We are perfectly situated to expand urban farming. Hydroponic farming is lucrative. We have a lot of abandoned warehouses that would be great converted into hydroponic farms. I'm also a big fan of tiny house communities and tiny house developments to attract young people. I'm a fan of the Dollar House program because we need affordable housing, and I'd like to see us try to renovate houses instead of destroy them to the extent possible, because I'm big into recycling. I'd like to build a solar highway between Chicago and Michigan City that pays for itself. It's essentially a protected bike lane, but bikers, if they have no chance of running into diesels and cars, will use the bike. You can actually bike from Chicago to Michigan City, and it's been a very popular attraction in Norway and in South Korea, and we're perfectly situated because we already have trails that we could connect. I'm also a big fan of vocational rehab. We need to teach young people how to use their hands. Like Melissa was saying, not everybody wants to go to college, and we shouldn't force them into that role. We need plumbers and electricians in Gary and in Hammond and all over this district. You can't find one.
Thank you.
To get a list. So thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. Our last moderated question will go to each candidate. I want to remind you that following this question, the formal discussion will be over. However, our audience is welcome to ask questions after this question. And the question is as follows. Some would argue that our national public health crises and economic devastation from COVID-19 already existed before the pandemic. It suggested that the underlying issues of income inequality, inaccess to quality health care, and a public readiness plan are all needed within Black and Brown communities. What's your plan to specifically address those issues in the region as a representative for us in Washington, D.C.?
Okay, so I am one of the few candidates that isn't parroting other people's ideas as far as healthcare plans. Both sides. I'm not picking on a side. I'm just saying we have to have revolutionary, workable changes to our healthcare system. Price tag transparency, which the president has already started, but we can't stop there. We also need deductible security. Those two things together have been in use in the country of Singapore. They have some of the healthiest citizens in the world and pay the least per capita out of almost every developed nation on earth. It will provide universal coverage without destroying the things that make the United States a prime target of medical travel to here for good medical care, right? There's no massive waiting lines here. Price tag transparency, deductible security. These two things are critically important. We also need to address the fact that if we implement a system such as Medicare for All, it's going to take choice away. It's going to have several negative effects across the board, including less pay for doctors, which means there are many people that would normally go to medical school that aren't going to continue. We're going to end up with less providers than we have now, massive waiting times. It's never been done. Socialized medicine has never been done on the scale of the size of the population of the United States. I am one of the only candidates on the right to recognize, though, that we do need fundamental changes to our healthcare plan, our healthcare system, and just putting out, do this, do that, isn't going to work. I'm willing to listen to all ideas and work towards making it a reality for not just the 1st District, but the entire country.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dion. Jim, please.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jordan. Public health inequality, income inequality were huge issues before the coronavirus crisis, but that crisis, not surprisingly, has only served to magnify the inequalities that we continue to experience in this country, but particularly in this region. Of course, we've heard and seen the numbers that the epicenter or the focal point of the coronavirus outbreak in Northwest Indiana was the city of Gary. We saw it in Chicago, being on the south side of Chicago. So we really need to get serious about addressing the disparities in public health outcomes. Not only the disparities in access to healthcare, that's a big problem, but also the disparities when it comes to issues like environmental justice, which has our most polluting industries in this region being near or in poorer communities or Black and brown communities in Northwest Indiana. So I focus on a couple of things. First and foremost, that's why I think it's absolutely critical that we get to universal health care in this country. Healthcare is a human right and we must get there. And the way that I support to get there is Medicare for all. If we have universal coverage, we'll have more providers in our communities. That's also where that transportation piece comes in to make sure that people can get to their providers. The other thing that we need to look at is addressing that environmental justice, environmental racism point of view. Of course, in Northwest Indiana, we have some of the highest rates of asthma and cancer in the country and in the region. And we also have very high infant mortality rates. So we need to address those pollution issues. We also need to address things like food deserts. And there's legislation in Congress that I would support to address food deserts. The last thing I note is we need to raise the minimum wage. We need a living wage so that every American that is working can support their family. I support a $15 an hour minimum wage indexed to inflation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Colonel Daggett.
Yes, this pandemic has clearly showed us the fallacy in having healthcare connected with a job. Because the reality is that with all of the people lost their jobs, they obviously lost their healthcare. That has been a disaster waiting to happen for years, and now we see the fallacy of that. We must not connect healthcare to people's jobs. We must also make sure that as we are recovering from this pandemic, we recognize that the underlying systematic racism in the nation will cause those who are the last hired and first fired to be affected more than any others. We need to make sure we look at that as well. The contamination that we have ignored in this discussion in some of our surrounding communities, that has to be dealt with because the underlying conditions that come from that contamination, sterilization, low IQ scores of our children, that has to be dealt with right away and immediately. Criminalizing churches, what a big mistake. At some point, we need to call for a national day of prayer, ladies and gentlemen. We've tried everything else. If we're just going to wait on a vaccine and a cure, in my mind, a national day of prayer would make a huge difference as we move towards trying to deal with this epidemic. And we shouldn't forget the opioid crisis that was taking place before the pandemic and has now been exacerbated even further. What we are dealing with is a situation where families need support, families need help, and we must be willing to step up to the plate and do that. I'm just amazed to see Mitch McConnell and others complain that the unemployment benefits that some are receiving is more than what their normal salary or normal pay would be. Really? Let's see that kind of complaint for Amazon or for the airlines that were soaked in cash prior to this pandemic and yet received a huge stimulus. Ladies and gentlemen, fair is fair. And we must have someone who's going to be willing to let the chips fall where they may on behalf of the residents of First District. And I think I'm the person that's willing to do that. And I think we have to be committed to making that difference right here in our district.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel. Mayor McDermott.
Thank you, Jordan. I appreciate it. President Obama, who is obviously a famous president already just because he was elected in 2004, in 2008, 2 years later, did something that made him even more famous. He passed the Affordable Health Care Act, and he took 46 million uninsured Americans and reduced that number with the Affordable Care Act down to 27 million uninsured Americans prior to the pandemic that we've recently experienced. Since the pandemic hit, we've seen 30 million Americans lose their jobs. And we do know probably 2/3 of those workers that lost their jobs had their health insurance plan through their jobs, which puts millions more in jeopardy of, not having health insurance. That's just unacceptable in the United States of America. We should have a strong safety net to pick up people when they need it. A Medicare for all who want it type of plan, like the plan that was pushed by Mayor Pete Buttigieg when he ran for president of the United States. A safety net that's there to catch you when you need it, so that we could pick up all these Americans that are losing their jobs and pick up the 27 million uninsured Americans and give them a public health care option. However, I appreciate the sincerity of the candidates that are pushing hard for the Medicare for All plan. I appreciate and I understand they're coming from a good place by pushing a plan like this. I'm just very pragmatic when it comes to Americans that are satisfied with their health insurance plan. If you have a health insurance plan that you're satisfied with, if you're pushing a Medicare for All plan, what we're saying is we're going to take your health insurance and put you on a government plan. If you're happy with your current health insurance plan, what kind of party, what kind of government policy takes something that you appreciate and you enjoy and forces you onto a government plan? That's where you start losing me. I think we need a strong safety net. We need a plan that's there to catch you when you fall. So if you lose your job and you lost your health insurance with your job, you have a reasonable public option with reasonable co-pays, reasonable deductibles, low pharmaceutical costs. It should be there, should be available to all Americans. But if you have a plan that you like better, you should be able to keep that plan as well. Thank you.
Thank you for this question, Jordan. I was recently faced. Should I go?
Go ahead, Melissa, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. So I was recently faced with this issue. I manage government affairs for a global aviation company, and we had to furlough a lot of our workers because of the pandemic, and the aviation industry was hit really hard. And so my company made a conscious decision to furlough workers, but while keeping their health insurance. And so I had to take a significant cut in my salary, and a lot of other people who are still working had to take a significant cut in their salary just to maintain the health care of our workers, who we hopefully will get back after the pandemic leaves. So one of the things that I would focus on while enhancing healthcare, enhancing the ACA, and making sure that Medicare is properly funded and fully funded, we also need to make sure that we have jobs that are pandemic proof. And I spoke about it earlier about the construction industry. We need to invest in infrastructure. We need to make sure that we are creating an economic environment that is pandemic proof, where we can have people who continue to have their health care even during instances like this, and incentivize the corporations. I know we don't want to be a corporate heavy society, but a lot of people do work in corporations and they do work for companies. And so we need to make sure that they are able to provide and to continue healthcare, because if we have 30 million people without a job and no healthcare, we're going to perpetuate this pandemic. And so we need to make sure that we are able to still provide healthcare to the people who are who work for companies or.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Frank, you have the floor.
Yes, first and foremost, what we all must understand is healthcare is going to be different after the pandemic. The statistics are going to show that the hardest hits were taken in the Black and brown communities. And so that has to be re-engineered on how we approach healthcare throughout the nation. We have the Affordable Care Act, which is administered through the Indiana HIP plan. I, more than any candidate here, knows how it is to sit on the other side of the table when you're serving the vulnerable population, when someone has to choose between a deductible for chemotherapy and being able to provide for their home, being able to provide food or insulin or medication. And so what I have is that experience. And when I go to Washington, D.C. as your next member of Congress, I'm going to make sure we have a comprehensive healthcare plan that builds on the Affordable Care Act, that allows us to make sure that the states buy into it, and that we have a public option. The public option means that if you do not have healthcare, you're able to build and buy into that program that's able to protect you. Then secondarily, we use the leverage of the number of people who are in that group to be able to, first and foremost, be able to negotiate pharmaceutical drugs and pharmaceutical pricing based on the leverage. The United States of America doesn't allow that. We have to be able to create an opportunity. Then when we come to the Black and brown people, if you really want to understand that there's a systemic accessibility going on throughout those communities, people turn to the emergency rooms more than they do their family practice physicians. We have one of the highest infant mortality rates in the nation. And so if you create access for that, if you create and eliminate barriers, and you have a plan that does that, you'll make great change. Secondarily, I'm endorsed by the United Steelworkers and also by the American Federation of Teachers. They have given up pay raises for their health care. And for those individuals who have given up supplemental pay increases and they believe they have the best health care possible, I want to lift the nation up to be able to have the same type of access to the same type of health care and allow those individuals to keep it. Thank you.
Scott?
Scott? Mhm.
Yes. Well, to start with, we need to tell the truth about Medicare for all. And the truth is that it is better than any Cadillac plan that any union could have. Cadillac plans have nothing to do with coverage, but the cost of premium. And that's why they were taxed, because they were trying to disincentivize high premium plans that really benefit insurance companies. Medicare for all will save us $450 billion a year and give us a lot more free choice than we have currently with our private insurance companies. I support Jayapal's Medicare for All plan, in part because it gets rid of the Hyde Amendment where you could have federally funded abortions. But I also believe that we need to modernize our community hospitals, modernize our nursing homes. Indiana's nursing homes are in very poor condition. We need to have community outreach to the Latino and Black American communities. Latinos are afraid to come to public health departments sometimes because they're afraid of issues with deportation. Black Americans, I met with this Black homeless man at our hospital because he was worried that we were trying to infect him when we were trying to test him. And that goes back to the Tuskegee effect. You know, we need to build trust with Black Americans and with Latino Americans and with immigrants and with undocumented immigrants as well. We need community outreach through our public health departments. We need to expand our urgent care centers. And if we don't have urgent care centers that are for profit, we need to have them developed, fill in the gaps with public health departments offering more urgent care centers to minority communities. That includes women's services as well, such as like Planned Parenthood does, but through urgent care centers as well. We need it in different languages. We need translation services. We need also to look at people with disabilities and elderly people at home, especially minority elderly people and minority people with disabilities, to do outreach to their homes to make sure they're receiving, whether it's a vaccine for this.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Scott.
Sure.
Attorney Hall?
Yes, I would like to start by saying that I want to thank Colonel Daggett again for, he sounded like our Sunday school class Sunday when he mentioned the concept of national prayer. And I would like to make an addendum to that and say international prayer, considering the COVID-19 problem we have globally. However, I don't think we should try to reinvent the wheel. What I would do is get a group of experts together from our district and from Washington and other areas and study the issue or the issues and try to determine and pick the best aspect of some of the current medical situations we have, such as Obamacare. You know, it's not all bad. We should evaluate it and take out what we would consider is not being appropriate to fulfill the needs we have in our district and in America, as well as throughout the world. So therefore, that I would bring together again a group of experts, medical experts, as well as others in our district and in the country. And we would research and study the issues very carefully again, maybe even Bernie Sanders again, and see if we could develop a concept that would be conducive to our economy in our country, in our district, and otherwise. So I would certainly encourage those to vote for me for the congressman of the 1st District. And we would address a lot of these issues through town hall meetings and other meetings with individuals who are more educated in the area than I am, because we can learn from everybody. So I wouldn't try to reinvent the wheel. I would try to build.
Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Hall. Sabrina.
Americans are spending $20,000 a year for an average family of 4 for Medicaid, for healthcare. The rest of the industrialized world is half that. And we're talking about Austria, Japan, Canada, England, countries with good healthcare systems are paying half of what we're paying. And the reason for that is because we have profit built into our healthcare system. Healthcare should not have profits built into it. We've got a 53% overhead in private industry in healthcare. Medicare is 3% overhead. And it's fear-mongering from the right to hear people say that Medicare for All wants to take your healthcare benefits and your doctor. That's absolutely false. And it's perpetuated by people who have a stake and an interest in the status quo, candidates who are funded by Big Pharma, for example. Medicare for All is the most elegant, cost-effective way to bring everyone under the health insurance umbrella. Saying a public option is saying nothing, because we already had 40 million people underinsured and uninsured before COVID-19 hit. And if there were a way to include them in the umbrella, we would have done it. No one's been able to figure out how to do it. Costs go down with an insurance premium when you get more people on that premium. And that's the reason Medicare for All is the most cost-effective solution to fixing our healthcare problems. I also agree that it should not be contingent on you having a job, because pandemics are going to increase. They are related to climate change. As climate changes, microbial life changes. Pandemics are here to stay, and we have got to get everybody on healthcare immediately. And Medicare for All, to me, is the most elegant and the most cost-effective way. We should be cutting our premiums in half and not paying the 53% overhead and the profits that are in private industry. And it's got to stop. And getting money out of politics will be a big step in that direction. But everyone should be covered, and you'll keep your doctor and your oncologist and your pediatrician. The only thing that you'll be giving up is your insurance company. We're not going to build hospitals. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. And thank you to all of our candidates for asking or answering the moderated questions. We're moving on now to audience questions. I'd like to remind you that our formal discussion that has ended, but I'd encourage you all to stay to see what our audience has to ask you. To our audience, I'd like for you to please add your questions to the dialogue box in this chat. We will only be able to take 2. And I'd like to encourage you to ask them as soon as you can. The first question that we have, again, to all candidates is as follows. The Green New Deal has become a widely adopted position amongst liberals, particularly young Democrats. Are you committed to supporting the Green New Deal? Why or why not? What measures are you prepared to take in Congress to address the racialized nature of environmental justice? This goes to every candidate. You will once again have 2 minutes to answer, no longer, and we ask that you answer the question exactly as it is asked.
All right.
We'll also start in our regular order. If you
Sorry.
abstain from answering the question, please just stay silent and we'll move on to the next person. Sorry, Dion.
No problem. Sorry to jump in on you there. Are we good now? Okay. A lot has been made of the Green New Deal, and I don't support it in its current form. I do support environmental changes, addressing very clear issues. Here in Northwest Indiana, we have the steel industry, we have many other industries that are pollutants, right? They do contribute to the environment. But any plans that we institute, first of all, have to have realistic goals, and the Green New Deal does not. Any environmental things that we become a part of has to be supported by everyone. Other countries, for example, jumping into other countries and saying, yes, let's do this. If the worst polluters, which are China and India, are not on board, if they don't agree to the terms, we're way down the list on the list of polluters. We're way down the list on the contributors to CO2, to plastic, to all of the things that are real concerns for my children and their children. A lot has been made that the right doesn't care about the environment. I'm on the right and I care. I absolutely care. We have to start using renewable sources. We have to start using longer lasting materials. Recycled plastic is fantastic for many things, including our roadways. It's actually been shown to last longer than asphalt. It's been shown to last longer than concrete in many cases. And it's a block by block procedure that can be used to replace it. Painting the highways white like they do in LA, these are all things that have real effects. The Green New Deal, again, in its current form is unrealistic and it just can't happen. There's no way you're gonna get the support needed to actually pass this legislation. Back to the drawing board, let's figure out what really will pass. Let's figure out what really will work. Getting rid of all the cows is not gonna happen. It's just not going to happen. But we can get together, and I'm more than willing to sit down with people from both sides.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dion. We're moving on to Jim.
Climate change and environmental justice are both, critical issues. Climate change, of course, is an existential crisis for our world, but it is important that as we address climate change and other environmental issues, that we do it in a way that's equitable. And we really look at a history of inequality and environmental racism that we have in this country and in this region. I support the Green New Deal. I support it for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think that the benchmarks that it sets for getting the United States and the world to carbon neutrality are critical in order to stave off some of the worst effects of climate change, but also because it works to address those challenges in a way that is equitable and that addresses some of the other inequalities, be it healthcare inequalities, be it environmental inequalities that we have in this country. And so that is why I think it's a good framework. Of course, the job of our next representative and other people in Congress is not only going to be to hopefully back that, but also back the specific policies that are going to address that. Now, an important piece of that is are the environmental justice concerns that we have, certainly right here in Northwest Indiana. I touched on it a little bit earlier. The reality that our heaviest polluting industries are primarily in poorer communities and in Black and brown communities. The reality that we have some of the highest infant mortality rates in the world in parts of our district. The reality that we have some of the highest asthma and cancer rates in Indiana right here in our district tells us that we need to address things. So first and foremost, that's going to require a really significant federal investment, right? Cleaning up a lot of these problems is going to cost a lot of money, and we need the federal government to help address it. We also need to make sure that industries are complying by the rules that are on the books right now, and that they are getting, stricter and as is appropriate, and things go forward. And we need to make sure that when there is land that's no longer being used for industry, that we're finding other productive uses of it that aren't going to continue that history of pollution and are going to provide more beneficial and also going to benefit our economy going forward and quality of life issues in this region. Those are going to be some of the things that I look forward to focusing on.
Thank you, Jim. Colonel Daggett.
No one should be expected to choose wealth over health or health over wealth. And what we have going on here with the Green New Deal is a situation where we have not gone far enough. I understand, however, that this is an initial volley, if you will. This is kind of the first shot across the bow, if you will, to begin the discussion on what's critical. I'm concerned that we have not looked closely at cleaning up areas right now that people are suffering within. And I mentioned the contamination in East Chicago. There's contamination now being found in Robertsdale, in many of the yards, many of the homes in Robertsdale. So the issue of the Green New Deal has to start with reality. We have to start cleaning up first. And we have to be honest about the Green New Deal. We seek recycling, renewables. We seek the poor and the middle class to recycle and renew, but we don't insist upon the rich recycling and renewing. And so if we want to be consistent and fair, we must be willing to do this. I'd like to make sure that the millennials know we're counting on you in this issue. We need you to look into situations where you're dealing with a university that is not meeting the guidelines here. You can speak your piece, and you can make sure that you want your universities to divest in companies that are causing contamination within our community and within our areas. But we must be honest about this. No one should be forced to choose health over wealth. And if we're willing to commit ourselves to this, to make sure that this is the case, then we will have a situation where we begin to actually make a difference in the lives of our community and our people.
Thank you, Colonel. Mayor McDermott.
You know, Hammond just got hit by another 100-year storm on Saturday. And we've had probably 5 or 6 100-year storms since I've been mayor. You know, out in the West Coast, the fire season's longer and more fierce. More acres are burning every single year. Hurricane season on the East Coast and in Florida and the Gulf Coast is more intense every single year. Right here in the 1st Congressional District, we look at Lake Michigan water levels at an all-time high. It's battering the shoreline, and it doesn't look like it's getting better. It looks like it's getting worse. There's no doubt that climate change is occurring. There's no doubt that global warming is occurring. We're seeing it with our own eyes. I'm 51 years old, and the climate has changed in my lifetime. I could see it with my own eyes. I don't like omnibus bills. Like, do you support the Green New Deal? Well, there's a lot of parts of the Green New Deal I do support. I just don't like a big bill with hundreds of different moving parts to it and having to support all 100 different parts of the huge omnibus bill. There are many parts of the Green New Deal I support. There's many things about flattening the carbon footprint that I've done and that I support, like flattening the footprint in Hammond. We went with low efficient LED lights across our entire city, replaced our entire fueling efficient cars with propane tanks, and reduced our carbon footprint right here, saving millions of dollars in the city of Hammond. I support wind power. I signed up Hammond to be a wind power city with NIPSCO. I worked in a nuclear power plant. I support nuclear energy. We just need to figure out what to do with the waste when it's finally spent, which takes 20 or 30 years, by the way. And not only that, we have to make them incredibly safe, like military nuclear reactors are. I worked on hydroelectricity and when I worked for NIPSCO. City of Hammond had one of the first recycling plants in the entire Northwest Indiana region. And I've actually held recycling summits in the city of Hammond, put out instructional videos on how to properly recycle, and have actually gone to the different recycling manufacturers where they take the recycling and make things like Huhtamaki and Hammond. We need more Huhtamakis. Instead of shipping our recyclables to China, we need it to be right here in America.
Thank you, Mayor. Melissa?
Thank you. So I support aspects of the Green New Deal as well. You know, do I support leveraging funding to help communities that are affected by climate change? Absolutely. Do I support upgrading existing infrastructure to weather the storm, like what we are seeing with all of the flooding? Absolutely. Do I support renewable energy sources? Absolutely. That is the way that our world is going towards, and the jobs that it will create is unbelievable. And those are jobs that we can have right here in Northwest Indiana. Being born in a city like East Chicago, I'm very familiar with Marktown, and I don't think that companies should benefit off of the environmental damage that they are causing to our communities in our that are Black and brown. You know, I think that should be a legislative agenda on a state level to make sure that there are companies that don't benefit from the contamination that they cause to our communities. It's very interesting just to hear, you know, everyone's point of view, but I definitely hold the elected officials accountable for these things. They know that that You know, there are companies contaminating our communities, and they receive checks from these companies. They receive benefits and perks from these companies. And unless we hold these companies accountable, they will continue to do what they do. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Frank?
Thank you very much. So do you support the Green New Deal? Yes, I support the Green New Deal as long as we use American steel and that we get the steel industry back to work. Sabrina consistently has been someone who's talked about the Green New Deal and renewable energies. And I agree with her in the fact that we must be able to create economies, especially with a 16% unemployment rate. So of course, all legislative bills are going to be omnibus and there's going to be a lot to it. But as a legislator, as a member of Congress, you have to be able to prioritize and understand you're not going to get perfection from a bill. What you have to do is you have to understand what it takes to get our economy back on track. And my first priority will make sure that our workers, our labor force gets back to work. And then secondarily, what we talked about is environmental injustice. And what I bring up there is West Calumet. Other candidates mentioned it. The fact of the matter is I was boots on the ground when West Calumet came. I can name the zones with the lead crises. I was at every summit. And what we need to know about the EPA is that they must have teeth. They must protect people instead of industries. And you have to remove the bureaucratic red tape. So when we talk about the steel industry, we talk about the national dunes. The workers, the steel workers want to work in a safe environment. They want to drink safe water. They want to breathe clean air. And so there is dollars to be able to create infrastructure and incentives for the steel mills. They have zero discharge. Our water, our greatest resource, had cyanide poisoning twice placed in that water. And so you've got to have an EPA that doesn't allow the companies to regulate themselves, that they step in and the penalties are more than the infrastructure. So what I mean by that, it's cheaper for a manufacturer or someone who isn't being regulated to pay the fine than it is to invest in their infrastructure. Our system is broken. And as a member of Congress, I'm going to work with the steel industry, the steel workers, and the EPA to make sure that we find a way to incentivize investment to depollute our air and our water.
Thank you, Frank. Scott?
Thank you. You know, I love the Green New Deal. I feel like I've waited my whole life for this bill. One of the reasons why is because, you know, being a voter and involved in politics since I was a little kid, listening to my parents talk about it, they were very astute and educated when it came to politics. You know, one thing I learned right away is we have no national economic policy in America. We just have a bunch of corporations that donate a lot of money to campaigns, and the richest campaign buys the most signs and commercials, and they usually win. What we need is a system, a national economic policy, a national economic framework to pass laws through that framework. The Green New Deal provides us with a national economic framework that addresses our economic needs, social justice, and fairness. The preamble of the Green New Deal talks all about all the responsibility of the government to have a fair economic system for minorities and vulnerable populations and so on and so forth. And so, but it also builds in the climate part of it. It's not a bill that says that we're going to spend this much money doing this particular thing. It talks about economic justice and fairness and gives us guidelines for laws, like a jobs guarantee, or like Medicare for all is actually part of the Green New Deal, really, because it's about everyone having access to affordable health care, equal access to comprehensive affordable health care, affordable housing, a jobs guarantee. All of these things are part of the framework of a Green New Deal, that instead of, you know, spending all this money on defense, we lower defense spending and spend it on our economy. We bring that money back home here to our communities, like for high-speed rail, to be produced by our steel companies right here in Indiana, to improve our water systems, reclamation plants, pipes. All this stuff needs to be replaced and repaired. We have thousands of miles of roads that need to be repaired. You know, the Green New Deal would just make sure that all minority groups, women, Blacks, Latinos have equal access to the jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks.
Attorney Hall, I'd like to remind everyone for a moment to answer the question exactly as it is asked. If you need me to repeat it, I'm actually happy to do that. Attorney Hall?
Yes, I would support the Green New Deal concept. However, I think it has many aspects to it. I think under this rubric, and I will try to keep my comments focused on the question. However, our former mayor, Mayor Karen Freeman Wilson, started a concept in Gary, the green urbanism concept, as well as the Love Your Block. Now, I think this is a part of the Green New Deal. And also, in addition to that, in our block, we started Plant a Flower and Keep America Strong and Beautiful. Plant a flower and keep it powerful. And I think that would be an aspect of the concept of the Green New Deal. But at any rate, I would support it, and we would try to expand on the concept and develop it to be conducive to the legislative intent that's been introduced, and of course, build upon it in any way after an extensive and comprehensive research program to study the concept and look for ways that it can be improved upon, and those aspects of the concept that we feel do not need to be improved on, we would discard. So therefore, I would just study the concept. I'm not that familiar with it, but we've started on a smaller scale here in Gary, Indiana, with our former mayor, and I would hope that the current mayor is going to continue with the concept, the Love Your Block concept, and the green urbanism at a local level that hopefully will be expanded throughout the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Hall. Sabrina?
Thank you. In the 1930s, President Roosevelt, when faced with tens of millions of Americans out of work, instituted the New Deal and put millions of Americans back to work rebuilding our infrastructure. The coronavirus impact on our economy requires exactly the same response. And coronavirus has given us a rare opportunity to rebuild our infrastructure and go in the direction of renewable energy. Again, all of Indiana's big employers have said they won't build factories here until they have greater access to renewable energy. So the Green New Deal, not only do I support it, my entire economic plan builds on their overall framework, and it's tailored to Northwest Indiana's resources, including land, port, steel, and access to a consumer base. When we start to attract more green development, we will then start to attract more millennials, because young people of all races care about climate change. People under 40 care severely, and a lot of them voted that as their #1 issue in some of our opinion polling. And so I think that's also a good way to attract the millennials and keep them here. But again, my tiny house communities, my wind, my energy farms development, my hydroponic farms, urban farming, it's all part of my idea for greening our economy, and it will make Northwest Indiana the economic powerhouse of the country. So not only do I support it, I think it's absolutely essential, and we need something just like the New Deal. That's why they called it the Green New Deal. I don't agree with everything in the Green New Deal, because some of it's just aspirational and doesn't belong in an economic development plan. But overall, I think it is the answer. And I'm very anxious to get working on the New Deal for Northwest Indiana. And I think it will make us in front of everyone else when we start these green initiatives. And it should not be up to NIPSCO to decide, by the way. Our private employers are asking for more access to renewable energy, and it should take it's going to take a national policy to push that through, and national resources to make it happen. And I don't think we have a choice. Pandemics are going to be on the rise as our temperature rises. So yes, I support it for those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you to you all for answering. We have one more audience question. Our audience has truly asked some fabulous questions, and we will make sure that you have the opportunity to access all of their questions and hopefully answer all of them. But for the time being, and out of respect for everyone's time on here, candidates, participants, myself and my co-founders, I want to limit this last question to a minute. And quite frankly, it's a simple question. The question is, will any of the candidates continue to help in the district, even if unsuccessful, on June 2nd? We'll start with our regular order, and that begins with you, Dion.
Okay. Yes. It's a very simple answer. Yes, absolutely. Regardless of how this whole thing goes, the primary, the general, I absolutely want to get involved in the community. I've been involved in the community before, but this race has highlighted some things for me that there are a lot of things wrong with the political process, and there are a lot of people that feel that their voices aren't heard. That's one of the reasons why I started doing the live stream at Dion for Congress, dionbergeron.com, so I could talk directly to you. This virus shut everything down. We weren't able to have the meet and greets. We weren't able to get involved with the community, knock doors, meet people. It's something that I think all of us should do. And I'm the only one to say I'm willing to go across the aisle. Let's say I win this primary. Come to me. I want to hear your ideas. We need more people willing to work with both sides of the aisle to hear the real concerns. All of these candidates have a group of people behind them that believe that that candidate represents
Thank
the
you,
idea.
Dion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dion. Jim.
Got me for the second time there. Absolutely. I've been really proud to be engaged with opportunities in groups across Northwest Indiana prior to this campaign, working as a public defender in LaPorte County, working with a nonprofit here in Porter County that provides early childhood education and other really valuable services to Porter County families, volunteering with a legal clinic at Trinity United Church of Christ in Gary. But one of the best parts about this campaign, and one of the things I've loved, is meeting people across this district, is learning about the great things that are going on across this district, the diversity that we have in this district, which I believe is our strength, and the really incredible opportunities that we have here in addition to some of our struggles. So I'm certainly planning on being successful in the primary on June the 2nd, but regardless of how that turns out, my confidence in Northwest Indiana has been restored, and my passion for fighting for it and working for it is stronger than it ever has been.
Thank you, Jim. Colonel Daggett.
Yes, we'll in fact have to stay involved because it is so critical to what we're doing here in this community. You know, during the course of my service, I had to bury 13 soldiers in Arlington Cemetery. The sacrifice that they made for this nation is above what we can possibly imagine. We owe it to them to send someone to Congress who is going to make sure that they take the voice of the people there. We have enough sociopaths in Washington as it is. We don't need to send another sociopath. What we need to do is make sure that our young people's voice is in the forefront of what will move our nation forward in the future. We want to thank you, Jordan, for your forward thinking here and making this possible to reach the community. We're proud of you. Keep up the good work, young lady. And we're excited about the future for our young people as well. God bless you and God keep you.
Amen.
Thank you, Colonel. Mayor McDermott.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you to Politicking for hosting this. Again, tonight when we go to bed, keep in your thoughts and prayers 100,000 Americans that have passed due to the COVID-19 epidemic and all the soldiers that made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedoms. My entire career has been a call to service. When I was 18 years old, I enlisted in the United States Navy for 6 years. When I got out after law school, I became a Lake County public defender, and I did that for 4 years, serving the underprivileged, the people that couldn't afford an attorney. 16 years of service to my hometown, Hammond, Indiana, as mayor of the city. While I was mayor of the city, I started a legal aid clinic to help those less fortunate. It's all about service. And I've been primarily in the business of serving Hammond residents for the last 2 decades of my life. And now I want to take the next step up and serve the entire congressional district and all 700,000 people that live here. But if I'm not successful in this primary on June 2nd, I will look forward to supporting the Democratic nominee in November. Hopefully it's me, but if it's not me, I'm looking forward to supporting the Democratic nominee like any good Democrat would do. So thank you for the question, Jordan.
Thank you, Mayor. Melissa.
Thank you, Jordan. I would absolutely stay involved. I actually moved to Gary, Indiana after I graduated law school because I wanted to be the change that I wanted to see in my community. And I speak a lot about not divesting the interest of my community, because if everyone leaves the community, then what is left? And so I definitely will stay engaged and help the community and fight against the injustices and fight against some of the things that we are seeing actually on this campaign trail. I definitely take offense when I see signs in my community and they have a darkened face. Why is that? Those are the things that I want to fight against. Those are the things that I will stand up for, because I take it offensively as a Black woman to see signs in my community where people have purposefully darkened their face. So I will stay engaged. I will fight for the people. I will fight against the injustices that continue to happen today. And thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Frank, please.
So I want to thank everyone for this opportunity. And the question was, how will you contribute if you are not elected? Well, Maya Angelou said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. So I've advocated for the most vulnerable populations for 15 years. I'm not making that up now because I want your vote. And there's proof in that. I've helped people find jobs. I've worked with industry. I've stood with labor to make sure that they found jobs. When people can't afford medications, I've made sure they were able to go to federally qualified health centers. We've gave them access to Indiana HIP plan. I, more than most, know what it means to be a servant leader because I have proven that over 15 years. I'm running for Congress because I want to continue that. I understand that we face a crisis, and who knows best than someone who's been in that situation where there is, such as the COVID-19 and the economic crisis of a 16% unemployment, to make sure that we find opportunities, we invest in infrastructure. I'm not a fake or a fraud. I'm authentic. And I've proven myself by being endorsed by the communities, being endorsed by the Gary Precinct organization, and I'm not going to let political talk get in my way. There's going to be a lot of games being played going forward, and the only game you need to know is, like I said in the beginning, judge the authenticity of each candidate and realize that there, as a member of Congress, that I'm going to support you. I'm going to support you as millennials, but more important, I want you to be inspired, not intimidated. I want you to understand that you're the most important thing.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Frank. Scott, please. And might I remind everyone to mute their microphone, certainly if you're not a candidate, and absolutely if you're not a candidate who's answering. Scott.
Thank you. Thanks again, Jordan, for hosting this event. Thank you for the voters attending and being an active voter and educating yourself about the candidates. I am absolutely interested, like Mr. Harper was saying, and Mr. Mrvan and others, there's so much going on in Northwest Indiana, but also in the state and nationally with organizations. I'm a social worker. I already spent a lot of time doing projects that help the region. I'm working on 2 suicide prevention grants and a study on suicide prevention as well. But I'm very interested in working with different groups like Sunrise Movement and helping establish Sunrise Movement in Northwest Indiana, as well as our revolution in Northwest Indiana.
Thank you, Scott.
Sure. Oh,
Attorney Hall.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I'd like to thank first of all of the candidates. And
I'm sorry, Attorney Hall. To our timekeeper, does Scott have any time left over?
He did have 10 seconds left.
Oh,
Please,
okay.
Scott.
I just wanted to
Apologies,
say,
Attorney Hall.
take some more time and visit my website at scottcostello.org. I put a lot of information on there so voters have time to learn more about me. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Attorney Hall, and my apologies earlier. I wanted to make sure that each candidate has their due time.
Okay. I'd like to thank all of the candidates for the very fine campaign they're running and for the very analytical responses they've given to the question tonight. I would also like to thank Melissa and you, Mr. Wilson, for coming back to the community and serving our community. That's what we need our young people to do, come back home and serve and become very productive citizens that you are. Yes, I will certainly be involved with the Katie Hall Foundation. My daughter, Attorney Jennifer Hall, is the president of the Katie Hall Foundation, and we're selling greeting cards and to advance the concept, because the passage of the Dr. Martin Luther King law in Washington and being signed by President Reagan was not only a giant step forward for African Americans, It was a quantum leap forward for all Americans, for democracy in America and for democracy around the world.
Thank
For
you.
a lady that was the great-great-granddaughter of a slave, and Dr. King, a great-great-grandson of a slave.
Thank you.
To be given this kind of recognition in
Thank you,
America.
Attorney Hall. Thank you. Sabrina, please.
Thank you. I've been active in the Gary community for years, way before I got interested in running for office. I had no idea I was going to run for office. I was a senior advisor to Jerome Prince and active in his election. And I saw through the Reimagine Gary process, the amazing talent and intellect that we have in Gary. We just need to tap it and give them a voice and give them a role. People want to be involved. I'll always be involved in community organizing, community volunteers, because there's a real strong talent there and we need to tap it. I've also been involved with animal welfare. I started an animal welfare coalition, and I was also active in getting the LGBTQ coverage, not just because I'm in that community, but because it was an oversight, I think, in the prior administration. I don't think it was intentional. It was just, we were not included in the non-discrimination policy. So I will absolutely continue these initiatives if I am not chosen. Obviously, I'd like to be chosen. I think I have the strongest plan. My plan is at gosabrina.com. I would encourage you to check it out. The first two drop downs are specific to Northwest Indiana and the jobs that we can bring here when we keep up with our greening initiatives and expand them through a New Deal-like program. I will always do that, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Sabrina. I want to thank everyone for spending time with us on this holiday. This is very important and special that we have an opportunity to hear from you all about your candidacies and your position. I want to remind everyone that early voting starts tomorrow and that election day is June 2nd. We all must vote if we have the opportunity and if we have that right, meaning if we're all over 18, please, please do us all a favor and show up on election day. I'd encourage everyone to reach out to those who weren't able to make this event and encourage them to do the same. Lastly, I all wish you a very, very happy Memorial Day. Please enjoy this time with your family and friends. And thank you again. Actually, lastly, what I'd like to do is encourage you all to download Politicking if you already haven't. It's an app that will help you up until election day and beyond, to be honest. Each candidate has some information that will be helpful to our voters. Thank you, Mayor. And will ensure us all to understand what our political capital exactly is. Everyone, thank you again, and please have a blessed day.
Thank you, Jordan. Great job.
Take care.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for putting this on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Very well done.
Thank you.